Being a UFC champion is something that only a few fighters experience. It means that you have won every fight in your area that the company has put in front of you. Unfortunately, not every fighter gets to experience this during their career. It isn't always because of a lack of talent or skill, but also because of bad timing. And in this video, we're going to list the 10 best UFC fighters who never won a championship. First off, at number 10, we have Donald Cerrone. During his long time in the UFC, Donald "Cowboy" Cerrone has become a fan favorite. We may have forgotten how popular Cerrone was before he fought Rafael dos Anjos for the title at UFC on Fox 17. Before he fought RDA, the last person to beat Cerrone, he had won 8 straight fights. Donald lost to Anjos in a match that would end in just 66 seconds. That must have been one hell of a match, with Rafael absolutely dominating. We can't even imagine a match where the opponent barely got time to counterattack before they were defeated. After that loss, Cerrone started over at welterweight, where he finished 4 opponents in brutal ways. His fans, even himself, were looking forward to a possible title fight with Tyron Woodley, but Cerrone lost to Jorge Masvidal and hasn't been as good since. At number 9, Alistair Overeem. Overeem already had titles from Dream, Glory, and Strikeforce. The UFC title was the last thing he needed to solidify his place as the best heavyweight fighter of all time. After beating Brock Lesnar at UFC 141, he went on to fight Antonio Bigfoot Silva in a contender match. We thought Overeem would win because the first 2 rounds were clearly in his favor. This would bring him closer to UFC gold. But Bigfoot punched an arrogant Alistair and knocked him out, ruining his prospects of fighting for a belt. Even though he lost, Overeem got back on his feet and went on a great run before finally facing Stipe Miocic at UFC 203. This match was going to end all his chances and hopes of taking the championship title home. He hit Stipe with a left hook that knocked him out, but after the Demolition Man failed at submitting Stipe, Stipe came back and won by TKO, ending his opponent's hopes of winning gold. At number 8, Yoel Romero. The most frustrating champ on this list might be the Soldier of God. He tried to win UFC gold 4 times, but each time he either didn't do well enough or did something to hurt his chances. At UFC 213, his first fight was against Robert Whittaker. It was a very close call, and many people thought the winner would be decided by the 5th round. Whittaker took Romero down in the 5th round, giving him a win by decision. After Robert got hurt and had to drop out of UFC 221, Romero stepped in and fought Luke Rockhold for the interim belt. He knocked out Rockhold, but couldn't win the title because he didn't make the weight cut on time. Romero fought Whittaker a second time for the unchallenged belt, but he couldn't win it because he had to cut weight again. His last chance to win the UFC title was against Israel Adesanya at UFC 248, but Adesanya won the main event, which wasn't very exciting and was pretty anticlimactic. Next up, at number 7, we have Uriah Faber. The California Kid may be one of the most well-known bantamweights ever. When the WEC was taken over by the UFC, Uriah stayed at the top of his division and came close to winning the title 4 times. At UFC 132, Faber's first fight for gold was against his rival Dominic Cruz, but Cruz won by decision. At UFC 149, Uriah stepped in at the last minute to fight Renan Barrero for the title, but he lost again by unanimous decision. Things just didn't work out in his favor, sadly. Faber kept fighting and won 4 matches in a row before going up against Barrero for the second time at UFC 169. In this match, Barrero knocked him out in the first round with a TKO. Faber's last chance to win UFC gold came when he fought Dominic Cruz again at UFC 199. Cruz won by decision again, just like he did the first time they fought. At number 6, Nick Diaz. The one time this Strikeforce champion had 2 chances to go for gold. He didn't do well enough. Diaz's first fight for a title was for the interim belt against Carlos Condit at UFC 143. This fight was supposed to be for the undisputed title between Diaz and George St. Pierre, but GSP tore his ACL and had to pull out of the fight. Diaz and Condit fought hard for 5 rounds, but a close decision gave the win to Condit. GSP fought Diaz at UFC 158, and he lost another decision to GSP. We don't know about you, but this poor guy definitely deserved at least 1 championship title. At number 5, Nate Diaz. Talk about talented genes running in the family. Because of how hard they fought and how well it worked for them, it's no surprise that the other Diaz brother is on this list. Nate had won his last 3 fights against Takanori Gomai, Donald Cerrone, and Jim Miller. At UFC on Fox, he was up against Benson Henderson for the title. Henderson beat Nate by a unanimous decision, ending the younger Diaz brothers' hopes of getting gold. Nate went on to beat Gary Maynard and Michael Johnson in impressive ways, before getting into a fight with Conor McGregor and losing the BMF title to Jorge Masvidal. Moving on, at number 4, we have Damian Maia. The BJJ expert has lost his last 2 fights, but he was once among the top of both the welterweight and middleweight sectors. Maia fought Anderson Silva again at UFC 112 in Abu Dhabi. He'd already beaten 5 of his 7 opponents in the UFC by submitting them. What happened in his fight with Silva was that the Spider won by decision, but it wasn't a very good fight, which made the UFC bosses very angry. After losing to Chris Weidman on Fox 2, Maia moved down to welterweight, where he had a rough start, but soon won 7 straight fights before challenging Tyron Woodley for the title at UFC 214. Maia's vision of becoming champion ended when he had another poor performance and lost a decision. Do you think he deserves another chance? At number 3, Alexander Gustafsson. Alexander Gustafsson's first brawl against John Jones at UFC 165 was recently added to the UFC Hall of Fame. The Mauler had won 6 fights in a row, so he was going to fight Jones for the light heavyweight title. Both men would have a hard time in the fight, as they both ended up bloody and bruised. Even though a lot of us thought Alexander had accomplished enough to win, the winner would be Jones. At UFC 192, Gustafsson went up against Daniel Cormier for the gold again. In what could have been the fight of the year, Gustafsson lost another decision to the smaller man in DC. His fights with Jones and DC were so close that he could have easily won either one and become champion. Gustafsson's last title fight was a rematch with Jones at UFC 232, but this fight was decisive because Bones won with a KO. At number 2, Dan Henderson. 2 of Dan Henderson's title fights happened right after each other, which makes him an entertaining entry on this list. At UFC 75, Henderson fought Quinton Jackson for the light heavyweight belt. He lost to Rampage by a unanimous decision. He then moved down to middleweight to confront Anderson Silva for his belt at UFC 82, but he also lost by a rear naked choke in the second round. Henderson went on to have an amazing career in the UFC and Strikeforce, beating big names like Shogun Rua, Fedor Emelianenko, and Hector Lombard, even though he had lost many times before. His last fight was against Michael Bisping at UFC 204. Bisping won by unanimous verdict, ending the veteran's chances of ever winning UFC gold. Finally, at number 1, we have Joseph Benavidez. Joseph Benavidez was another fighter who had 4 chances to win gold. He's the best example of a fighter who could have effortlessly been the champion under different circumstances. Benavidez fought DJ for the gold belt for the first time at UFC 152, where a controversial decision would have gone to Mighty Mouse. He won a few times and then fought DJ again at UFC on Fox 9, but DJ knocked him out in the first round. At UFC Fight Night 169, Benavidez got the chance to fight for the gold against Davison Figueiredo, but he lost again to TKO. The UFC had to reschedule the fight because of an accidental headbutt and Figueiredo's weight problems, but the fight ended earlier with another win for Figgy, leaving Benavidez with no chance to win the title. All these fighters gave their heart and soul to the game, but sadly, the odds just weren't in their favor. That's all for this video. Which UFC fighter do you think deserved to win a championship, but didn't? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more exciting content in the future. Thanks for watching. See you next time.